Hey there, I am Johanna Brewer, Assistant Professor of Computer Science at Smith College and Director of Research for SIGCHI. I'm here to tell you about my alt.chi paper on extreme ungrading and hopefully to spark some discussion about how we can use human-centered design to reimagine computer science classrooms. But since I've been away from Chi for a minute, I wanted to quickly catch you up on where I have been. After finishing my PhD, I spent a decade in industry as CTO for a series of counterculture startups. My focus on anti-surveillance interfaces put me at odds with the operations of some major tech corporations, which are tales for another talk. But right away, I realized I was collaborating with and training very different sorts of developers than those who fit the FANG mold. So the folks that I saw as most ready to ask the critical questions that I wanted them to be asking and to think independently were typically those who were passed over by big tech corporations. The interview process to land a spot as a junior software engineer at places like Amazon and Google is often described as a brutal competition to solve standardized toy problems like a gladiator fighting in the Coliseum for entertainment. CS students from the competitive programs with rigid rubrics and intensive exams tend to excel at this grueling hiring process, and as instructors, leaning on automation to meet the demands for standardization at scale, a lot of folks end up teaching to the LEET code test. But while those graduates of schools and programs like that are certainly very capable, I find that they're often uncritical about some of the more pressing ethical issues that big tech poses. And so when I returned to academia 3 years ago, it was with the intention of intervening in this rapidly calcifying compliant coder pipeline. From movements like Tech Won't Build It to We Are Not Robots, protests questioning big tech's exploitative practices are getting louder and louder. And inside academia, the movement to re-examine the role that our culture of assessment plays has been gaining more and more traction. It's perhaps best evidenced by the growing interest in ungrading. Ungrading is assessment that minimizes or even eliminates point-based scoring of student work in order to emphasize formative feedback. It has been popularized by professors in the humanities like Susan Bloom and Jesse Strommel, and it is a practice that's picking up steam in many CS departments, which you can read a lot more about from folks like Karina Asseter, Andrew Burns, Scott Spurlock, Ella Tucson, and Timothy Hickey, just to name a few. But suffice it to say, there's a growing number of instructors who are reimagining their pedagogy in order to meet the moment of computational revolution that we find ourselves in. And in the spirit of what the Agile Manifesto and extreme programming did for software engineering in the early aughts, I want to lay out the core values that define the ungrading movement that is starting to galvanize within computer science. Those who are pushing beyond just offering intro courses in the sort of pass-fail category are starting to explore what I would call extreme ungrading, which is a commitment to do more than just move beyond point-based scoring and to focus on preparing students to thrive in industry or academia when they face complex conflicts without clear guidelines to follow, and to teach students how to self-direct their learning through fast failure and not hung up on appearing perfect, and to orient students towards self-improvement and collective impact by prioritizing demonstrable positive results over points, of course, and to foster collaboration between students with a diverse range of skill sets and backgrounds in a comfortable and challenging environment, and finally and ideally to train students to accurately assess their own work and the work of others based on observable outcomes rather than just their efforts. And so, to test these values in action myself, I engaged in an experiment to rewild my classrooms at Smith. I applied a human-centered approach to the redesign of an undergraduate software engineering course, and in a 2-year case study that ran from fall 2021 to spring 2023, with an average size of about 28.5 students, I used a participatory and iterative approach with a focus on universal design to maximize accessibility for the class. And during the course of this approach, I continuously gathered feedback through a multimodal methodology, including conducting intake, midway, and retrospective surveys of the students, soliciting input through in-class polls, chat server discussions, and office hours, and of course seeking external observations from my senior colleagues, and taking copious notes of my own, including a running log of planned changes for the next iteration. I designed the course to simulate the experience of a junior developer building a speculative product in an unfamiliar framework, something that many of us as software engineers have done. The big goal is to build a working Ruby on Rails application for a bike sharing service called Valet Bike in the fictional town of Nipmuc Notch, where we are said to reside. And this is really a high bar for a project, and it definitely was something that took me more than a semester to clear at my first startup. So I teach this class as a 3-hour workshop that starts with a short lecture and then is really focused on project work. In the first 3 weeks, I shuffle the students into different working groups so that they can give input on collaborators for their Scrum team, so that they're kind of paired into happy rowboats so that they can work together and pull together. I assign readings and trainings to prepare them for in-class activities, and I ask them to regularly engage in retrospectives and peer reviews. I also, of course, provide lots of written and verbal qualitative feedback on their project milestones, but I only assess their work on a simple scale of needs improvement, meets expectations, exceeds expectations, and distinguished. When I kind of kick off the class, I really implore students to show up and take risks to see if they can put software engineering techniques into practice for real and deliver their first minimum viable product that's ready to actually be deployed in the wild. And I don't have time to go through the roller coaster ride of the case study in this whole video, so I will just jump ahead and spoil my favorite findings from the paper and say that the experiment worked much better than I hoped, and the students produced high-caliber, human-centered projects which continually exceeded my expectations. Not only was their technical performance impressive, but they also had really exciting experiences of collaboration. The students often described our classroom as a welcoming and effective learning environment where they had a safe, positive experience working in a software engineering team that was as close as you'll get to a software engineering internship without an actual job. But perhaps most emblematically, one student who had struggled early on in the course only to finish strong shared that the hard times I had with my team were not failures. They were the best ways to learn invaluable lessons about teamwork. I'm a better programmer now, knowing that software engineering isn't easy. The processes are frustrating and painful, but to me, that's the best part. So, as thrilled as I am about the outcomes for my students, I'm presenting this paper at alt.chi in the hopes that I will spark debate amongst my fellow scholars of HCI about whether or not we have a duty to reshape computer science classrooms. But this paper has already caused quite an intense dialogue during the review process about whether or not this topic should actually be discussed at Chi. And rather than fanning those flames, I just want to underscore how freeing and enjoyable it is to create a space where students' minds are focused on what matters. And so for me, automated point-based grading makes teaching feel like I'm operating a kind of dystopian surveillance platform, one that I definitely do not want to replicate. And so I'm more interested in inspiring students to design technologies that will change the status quo for the better. And so for me, extreme ungrading frees me to cultivate a classroom with an accessible floor and a vaulted ceiling, and a place that I am excited to walk into each week and explore with my students to see what we are all capable of. So if you're considering to taking the quantum leap into ungrading, please reach out to me, johannabrewer.com, Dead Roxy on X, and Ultra Roxy on Discord. Thanks for listening. Take care.